really, I think it's got to be handled in a proper way. If it's not handled in a proper way, we don't want it to happen again. We can never let what happened in the 2020 election happen again. We just can't let that happen. And so the way we go, I know Kesh's working on it, everybody's working on it, and certainly Tulsi's working on it. We can't let that happen again to our country. Look at what's happened where you have millions of people being allowed to come into our country, all because of a crooked election, where they come from prisons, they come from jails, they come from mental institutions and insane asylums, they're drug dealers. The people that they've allowed to come into our country, we cleaned.
All right, folks, we have what can only be described as a major breaking situation. Former President Donald Trump made an Oval Office announcement suggesting that he's directed FBI Director Kash Patel and Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard to make sure what he calls the mistakes of 2020 never happen again. Now, what exactly happened in 2020? Democrats won key races, and Republicans lost control of certain offices. Trump now appears to be signaling that he wants changes made to national institutions and systems that could keep Democrats from gaining future power. This is a serious and alarming statement, one that points to growing efforts to influence election outcomes through pressure campaigns on state legislatures in places like Texas, Florida, and swing states such as North Carolina. And now, it seems, those same tactics may be reaching into federal agencies. Before we break down everything that's happening here, don't forget, if you find this kind of coverage useful, be sure to hit that like, subscribe, and notification bell to support the channel. Trump's recent comments suggest he's looking to reshape the country's democratic system into something resembling the illiberal democracies seen in parts of Europe. Governments that limit opposition power and weaken fair competition. Let's take a closer look at what he said in the full clip.
I think it's got to be handled in a proper way. If it's not handled in a proper way, we don't want it to happen again. We can never let what happened in the 2020 election happen again. We just can't let that happen. And so the way we go, I know Kesh is working on it, everybody's working on it, and certainly Tulsi's working on it. We can't let that happen again to our country. Look at what's happened where you have millions of people being allowed to come into our country, all because of a crooked election, where they come from prisons, they come from jails, they come from mental institutions and insane asylums, they're drug dealers. The people that they've allowed to come into our country, we cleaned.
Again, he's insane. Right. Listen, basically what Trump is saying, hey, listen, remember the border? How the border was terrible under Joe Biden. I guess that means we can't let Democrats win elections again. Not because we beat them at the ballot box, but because we are working to change the rules to prevent them from ever winning elections. That's illiberal as hell. I'll point out that Trump is actually experiencing some measure of setback in some corners in red states. So, as Politico reported, Indiana Republicans don't have the votes to back Trump's redistricting, Senate leader spokesperson says. The news just comes days after Trump held a phone call with reluctant members. Indiana Senate Republicans say they don't have the votes to pass mid-cycle redistricting despite a pressure campaign from the White House. According to a spokesman for Senate President Pro-Emp Rodri, but Donald Trump's allies are still demanding the matter comes up for a vote in a special session. Quote, "The votes aren't there for redistricting," said Molly Swigert, Bray's spokesperson. The news comes just days after Trump held a phone call with reluctant members of the caucus. Politico spoke to 4 people close to the sensitive talks, all of whom were granted anonymity to discuss the issue. Indiana State Republicans' latest move threatens to upend what has been a nationwide push from the White House to force red states to redraw maps ahead of the midterms. 3 of those people said Indiana Governor Mike Brawl was inclined to call a special session to redo the state's maps, a move that could come as early as next week. A spokesperson for Brune told Politico that the governor, quote, is still having positive conversations with members of the legislature and is confident the majority of Indiana State House Republicans will support efforts to ensure fair representation for every in Congress for every Hoosier. They said the White House conducted a dial-in poll of lawmakers that revealed the majority of Senate Democrats backed mid-cycle redistricting. But one of the Republicans cautioned that colleagues were confused by instructions for the survey because the administration did not provide guidance on how to move forward. 2 of those Republicans briefed on the poll said the White House believed the poll showed a majority of the holdout caucus supports mid-cycle redistricting, but they said that Bray and his leadership team represent the majority of no votes. Quote, if Bray would personally release his leadership to support this, there would be enough votes for this to pass. The White House did not immediately respond to requests for comment. A person close to the White House who was granted anonymity to discuss the pressure campaign disputed that the votes weren't there. So again, there's a full court press by Trump to effectively gerrymander his way into a majority. And he's facing some pushback, but this just goes to show how desperate he is. He does not want to compete with Democrats on relatively even terrain, so he's trying to rig the rules of the game in his favor, which just automatically guarantees him victory no matter how poorly he performs or how unpopular he is. It is staggering, and it is consistent with what he said in that first clip. He is working as both the President of the United States and as a political party leader, both at the federal and state level, to try to rig the game in his favor. And this is incredibly dangerous, and we need to stay vigilant, and we need to call it out. But with that in mind, there are other clips from this press conference that we need to talk about, including this, and which again, Donald Trump is visibly confused and doesn't seem to understand how percentages work.
And amazingly, everybody agreed. So our drug prices are going to be coming down 100%, 200%, 300, 400, 500% in some cases. A bill that cost $10 in London would cost $120 in, think of it, $120 in New York.
That statement is simply not possible. It doesn't add up mathematically. You can only go as high as a full 100%. Beyond that, it would mean the pharmaceutical companies are not just giving it away for free, but actually paying people to take the product, which of course makes no sense. It's just not how it works. And yet he continues to double down on this claim, either because he truly doesn't understand how it works or because he assumes his audience won't notice the contradiction. Maybe it's a bit of both. Anyway, let's take a look at some other clips that highlight this even further.
Do you know what happened there, and does that affect your decision whether or not to send tomahawks?
No, I don't want to have a wasted meeting. I don't want to have a waste of time, so I'll see what happens. But we did all of these great deals, great peace deals. They're all peace deals, agreements, solid agreements, every one of them. But this one, and I said, go to the line of battle, the battlefield lines, and you pull back and you go home, and everybody takes some time off because you got 2 countries that are killing each other. You got 2 countries that are losing 5,000 to 7,000 soldiers a week. So we'll see what happens. It's we haven't made a determination.
So this was former President Trump just recently. Either last week or the week before, he was expected to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Budapest. But he reportedly canceled the summit at the very last minute. To me, that doesn't exactly show a clear understanding of the ongoing conflict that he once promised to resolve on his first day in office. So far, that promise has fallen flat. His idea of a so-called peace plan seems to amount to allowing Russia to hold on to the territory it has already taken. which obviously raises serious questions about what Ukraine would gain in that scenario. In short, he's been flip-flopping back and forth, and it's becoming clear he doesn't seem to have a consistent position on the issue. Let's move on to the next clip.
The appeals court recently ruled that you can send the National Guard into Portland, Oregon. Do you feel unfettered to send the National Guard into whatever city you want now?
Well, I guess so. That was the decision. I can send the National Guard if I see problems. I looked at Portland over the weekend. The place is burning down, just burning down. We weren't there. We didn't spend much time there because we were waiting for that decision. But
I should point out that this case went before the appellate court, specifically the Ninth Circuit. It wasn't the full panel, but rather a group of 3 judges who reviewed the decision. 2 of them were appointed by former President Trump and 1 by former President Clinton. Now, even with that makeup, the panel ended up reversing most of the lower court's ruling, though not entirely. They determined that the Texas National Guard could not be deployed under these circumstances, but that the Oregon National Guard could be used within the state, even over the governor's objections and despite the earlier district court decision. What's especially noteworthy is that in their written opinion, even the majority acknowledged that some of the claims being made about the situation in Portland were exaggerated. However, they concluded that accuracy wasn't a deciding factor in whether the Guard could legally be deployed. It's a surprising interpretation, but one that reflects how these cases often play out. All right, let's go to the next clip.
we have the right to use the National Guard. You would think that would be common sense. We have the right to use the National Guard to put out trouble. Well, that's, how I got elected. One of the reasons I got elected. Yes.
Once again, he's being incredibly simplistic and misleading about this issue. The point isn't that the National Guard can never be deployed to respond to unrest. Of course it can. But there are clear legal standards that have to be met first. Even the judges appointed by former President Trump in the Ninth Circuit acknowledge that fact. It's not something a president can just decide to do whenever he feels like it, which seems to be Trump's interpretation. If that kind of unchecked authority were acceptable, then previous presidents, like President Biden or President Obama, could have sent the National Guard into conservative-led states whenever they claimed to see trouble. Can you imagine how Trump supporters would have reacted to that? The double standard is striking. But that's really the point. The inconsistency doesn't bother them. In fact, they seem to embrace it. The movement thrives on being able to say whatever is convenient in the moment, even if it completely contradicts what was said before. It's about power, not principle. All right, let's move on to the next clip.
Reached out to you about meeting on the government shutdown. Will you meet with him before you leave for Asia on Friday?
Well, I will actually. I'd love to meet with them. I just want them to open up the country first. The country is so hot right now. And they've never voted against, continuation. They've never voted against. They've never done that. They're doing this because they have Trump derangement syndrome. But I would love to meet. I would like to meet with both of them. But I set one little caveat. I will only meet if they let the country open. They have to let the country open. The people want to go back to work. They want to be served. They need the services of some people, and a lot of people need the money, the payroll. So I'll do it as soon as they open up the country. I'd like to meet.
So you won't meet with them until the government. Just to be clear, you won't meet with them until the government's open.
The government has to be open, yeah. The government has to be.
Mr. President.
You know how long it would take for them to do that? Just say, okay, government's open. That's it. There is nothing.
How long
They're
do you
not
think this could
negotiating.
go?
What they're doing is saying they lost the negotiation, and when we got the great big beautiful deal done, they lost that negotiation. Now they're saying, well, we want to get some of the things we lost. But the problem is the things they lost are very bad for our country. We don't want to have people come over from all over the world, from prisons and all, and have them have their health care paid for. We want to take care of.
Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And until next time, I will see you soon.